The rain had been steady since early morning, soaking the red clay of Fort Moore until it turned to slick mud. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter stood at the edge of the firing line, her boots half buried, her uniform dark and heavy from the downpour. The sky hung low, a dull sheet of gray pressing down on the empty range. Every sound carried the hiss of rain on metal, the thud of water hitting the canopy, where the 4 ranger candidates stood dry and laughing. She could smell the mix of wet earth and gun oil, a scent familiar to anyone who had spent enough years around rifles and weather that refused to cooperate. From under the shelter, Sergeant Kyle Duran called out to Specialist Brett Kelton, his voice light and mocking. They traded remarks about how the Army must be running out of instructors if they were sending her. Corporal Nate Vickers smirked, but stayed quiet, while Private Jake Owens shifted uncomfortably, the only one not joining in. Emily didn't move. Her patrol cap dripped water down the side of her face, but she didn't wipe it away. She had learned long ago that silence had power, and sometimes it spoke louder than argument. She lifted her radio, checked that the channel was clear, and logged her range as active. Her voice stayed calm, controlled. The same tone she used, whether speaking to a commanding officer or a private, still learning how to salute. She looked toward the group and told them that she was their instructor, that the qualification would begin once they were ready to take it seriously. Duran gave a short laugh. Kelton shook his head. None of it touched her. The only sound she focused on was the rain. Steady and patient, carving lines into the Georgia clay. Her rifle case rested beside her leg, the metal latch cold under her fingers when she adjusted it. The rain had crept through her sleeves and soaked her gloves, but she kept her posture straight, feet squared, chin level. Discipline wasn't something she switched on for inspection. It was muscle memory, built from years of doing things the right way even when no one was watching. The 4 under the canopy didn't know that. They only saw a woman who looked out of place in their world. Emily glanced toward the horizon, where fog blurred the tree line. The range was quiet except for the rain and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. She had been here before. Not this field, but this moment, the point where people decided who they thought she was before she ever had a chance to show them. Her pulse stayed steady. Her breathing even. She didn't need to convince anyone. The weather would pass. The test would begin. And when it did, her work would speak for itself. She adjusted her cap, tightened her grip on the rifle case, and waited in the rain. The plains of eastern Montana were open and endless, a place where winter ruled most of the year and the wind never stopped moving. For Emily Carter, it was home. The nearest hospital was 2 hours away down a road that froze solid every December. Out there, you learned early that if something broke, you fixed it yourself. And if something went wrong, help wasn't coming. Her father, a former Marine Scout sniper who had served in the Gulf War, believed that a person should always be ready for that moment. He taught her to shoot when she was 7. Not as a hobby, but as a skill to survive. She learned by watching the land itself. The wind in Montana never came straight. It curled through the coulees and around the barns, carrying snow in long white ribbons that showed her which way it would push a bullet. She could tell distance by how long the echo of a rifle crack took to bounce off the valley wall and return. Her father never explained in detail. He would only say, "Watch closer." And she did. By 10, she was hitting tin cans at 200 yards with an old bolt-action Archer. By 12, she could read a 20-degree temperature drop and adjust her aim without touching a dial. It wasn't science to her. It was rhythm, like the beat of a song she had learned by heart. When she turned 18, the ranch felt too small, and the Army offered something bigger. She enlisted and set her sights on the Rangers, knowing what that meant. The Ranger Assessment and Selection Program was a grind of cold water, sandbags, and miles of running. But Emily had already learned how to be uncomfortable. When others quit, she focused on breathing, on small victories, one task at a time. Her scores were high enough that instructors double-checked her paperwork, expecting a mistake. There wasn't one. She earned her spot in the 75th Ranger Regiment and trained as a sniper through the Special Operations Target Interdiction course at Fort Moore. There, she learned the formal side of what she had known instinctively since childhood reading wind: humidity, barometric pressure, and mirage. Her weapon became the M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, and she learned to trust it like a second set of hands. Her instructors called her methodical, patient, unshakable under pressure. They were right. Afghanistan tested everything she had built. On one mission, her unit was pinned by a machine gun nest across a valley. Her spotter called the wind. Reading a steady cross breeze at nearly 12 knots, Emily adjusted her scope. Feeling the muscle memory settle in her fingers, the shot broke clean. The round left the barrel at 2,850 feet per second and hit the gunner more than 1,300 meters away. The burst of dirt and silence that followed gave her team the 8 seconds they needed to move. 8 seconds was enough. They all made it home. Emily never talked much about that day, or the record that came with it. The people who mattered already knew. What stayed with her wasn't pride, but the reminder that precision came from discipline, not luck. Every breath, every correction, every squeeze of the trigger was a decision. For her, that was what defined a soldier. Not medals, not talk, just quiet competence in the moments when everything else failed. The drizzle had eased to a fine mist by the time the tension settled over the range. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter stood at the firing line while the 4 Ranger candidates clustered under the shelter, arms crossed, waiting for her to prove herself. Duran smirked like he had already won something. Kelton leaned on his rifle, pretending to look bored. Vickers stood with the posture of someone trying to decide which way the wind was blowing. And Owens, younger and quieter than the rest, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Emily could feel the weight of their judgment, not from what they said, but from what they assumed. She had seen that look before in every unit she had ever joined. It was always the same. She gave them a single order to set the targets. Duran started to argue, but one look from her silenced him. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her truck, parked behind the line. The sound of her boots in the mud carried farther than the low voices behind her. She opened the tailgate and flipped the latches on her rifle case. The M2010 Enhanced Sniper Rifle lay inside. Disassemble. Its matte finish beating with moisture from the air. She checked every part like a ritual she had performed 1,000 times. The bolt moved smooth and clean. The scope mount was tight. She brushed a hand across the stock, the way a craftsman touches a tool built for precision, not beauty. From a small box, she drew 5 rounds of MK 248 Mod 1 ammunition. Each brass case glinted dull in the gray light as she loaded them into the magazine, one by one. Thumb pressing steady, deliberate, she chambered a round and locked the bolt forward. The metal click was sharper than the rain. Then she picked up the rifle and walked back toward the line. The others watched her now, still but curious. Maybe, realizing for the first time that she wasn't going to talk them into anything, Emily dropped prone, elbows sinking into the damp soil. She adjusted the bipod legs, flattening her body into the earth. The target stood 1,000 meters away, a steel silhouette half hidden by haze. She unfolded her Leica rangefinder, checked the distance, then lifted her Kestrel 5700 from her vest pocket. Temperature, humidity, wind, 12 knots left to right. She turned the elevation turret 2 clicks up, the windage 2 clicks right, then settled behind the scope. The air between breaths felt still, like everything had paused to watch. Her finger rested against the trigger, not pressing, just knowing it was there. She exhaled halfway and held. The shot broke clean. So clean, It barely seemed to happen. The sound came a second later, a sharp metallic ring echoing through the rain. She worked the bolts smoothly, chambered the next round, and fired again. Then again. Each impact hit the plate center mass. 5 rounds. 5 perfect hits. The whole string lasted maybe 90 seconds. Long enough for the candidates to realize what they were seeing. When she stood, the drizzle had nearly stopped. Steam rose faintly from the barrel as she cleared the chamber and locked the bolt open. The air smelled of gunpowder and rain. She packed the rifle as carefully as she had assembled it. Not because anyone was watching, but because that was how it was done. When she finally looked up, their expressions had shifted. Duran's smirk was gone. Kelton's jaw had tightened. Vickers had that look soldiers get when they've just seen a new standard set in front of them. Owens couldn't hide his awe. Emily slung her rifle case over one shoulder and faced them squarely. Her voice was calm and level as she told them their turn was next. No challenge. No anger. Just order. They nodded without a word. The sound of rain faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet thud of boots on wet earth as they moved to their stations. Something had changed in that silence. Something small but permanent. The range had gone from test to lesson. And for the first time since morning, Emily knew they were finally ready to learn. The echo of the last shot still hung in the air when the range finally went quiet. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter cleared the chamber of her rifle, her movements smooth and deliberate. The rain had slowed to a light mist, barely clinging to her uniform. Behind her, the 4 Ranger candidates stayed silent, the weight of what they had just witnessed sinking in. She folded her bipod, packed her equipment, and was just reaching for the rifle case latch when her radio crackled to life through the static. A voice came through, calm but sharp with authority. It was Commander Ryan Hayes. SEAL Team 3. She hadn't heard that voice since Syria, during a joint operation 2 years earlier. He asked if she was still on the Fort Moore range. She confirmed, standing straight as if he could see her. Hayes explained that his unit was 20 miles north at a JSOC compound, running a live-fire hostage rescue scenario. Their primary sniper had been injured, and the clock was ticking. The exercise would begin in 90 minutes, and he needed someone he could trust. His tone was clipped, direct, the kind of voice that expected solutions, not questions. He told her he had been monitoring the open training frequency. He'd heard everything, the laughter, the comments, her calm replies, and the sound of 5 perfect hits. He said he remembered her work in Syria and knew she could deliver under pressure. Emily's reply was steady. She told him she could be there in less than an hour. Her voice was flat, professional, nothing more than acknowledgement and readiness. Then she signed off, clipped the radio back to her vest, and turned toward the 4 men. They were still frozen under the shelter. Duran's smirk was gone. His face looked tight, like someone who'd just realized a mistake too late. Kelton's arms had dropped to his sides. The confidence drained from him. Vickers stood still, studying her the way soldiers study something they wish they had noticed earlier. Owens met her eyes but said nothing. Emily told them their qualification was postponed. She added that they could reschedule through range control and left it at that. The Fations 24. There was no edge in her tone, only procedure. She packed her rifle into its case, loaded the rest of her gear into the bed of her Army-issued F-250, and shut the tailgate with a dull thud. The rain picked up again, soft but constant. As she climbed into the driver's seat, she caught a glimpse of the 4 standing together, not talking, just watching her leave. The truck's engine started, and she eased down the narrow dirt road, the tires cutting through wet clay. The sound of the radio faded behind her, replaced by the steady rhythm of rain against the windshield. For the first time all morning, the silence around her felt clean. The drive north from Fort Moore was quiet except for the hum of the tires on wet asphalt. The rain had eased into fog, stretching low across the pine trees that lined the road. By the time Staff Sergeant Emily Carter reached the JSOC training compound, the air was still and cold. The kind of night that carried sound for miles. She parked outside the main operations building, where floodlights washed the gravel lot in pale yellow. Commander Ryan Hayes was already waiting for her. Clipboard in hand. Uniform crisp. Demeanor calm. He greeted her with a professional nod and a single line of acknowledgement before getting straight to business. There was no small talk. Only the kind of focus that came with people who had seen the same type of pressure before. Inside the briefing room, Hayes spread a map across a folding table. The target compound covered a 2-square-kilometer section of wooded terrain marked with multiple buildings and approach routes. He walked her through the plan with precision, pointing out ingress points, comms relays, and designated sectors of fire. The SEAL assault element would clear the compound, while Emily would provide long-range overwatch from an elevated ridge 850 meters southeast of the objective. Her role was to engage role players simulating hostile threats at ranges between 400 and 900 meters, while keeping communication open on the encrypted net. There would be no room for error. Every round fired would be recorded. Every hit reviewed. Emily unpacked her equipment methodically. The M2010 enhanced sniper rifle came out first. Chambered in. 300 Winchester Magnum. Coated in matte black. She attached the suppressor, adjusted the bipod, and checked her scope mount for torque alignment. The Leica rangefinder and Kestrel 5700 ballistic computer came next. She confirmed 0 on the optic, cross-referenced data for wind drift and elevation, and loaded a fresh magazine of MK248 Mod 1 match-grade rounds. She checked comms with Hayes on the encrypted frequency, then switched to her team net to monitor chatter. Once everything was green, she stepped out into the night. The ridgeline was slick with mud and pine needles. Emily lay prone behind a tripod, settling into the familiar stillness that came just before a mission. Through her scope, she could see the faint outline of the compound below, lit only by distant red strobes marking safe boundaries. Hayes's voice came through her headset, steady and precise. Calling the start time, the operation began at 2:30 a.m. The SEALs moved like shadows, their formation fluid and quiet as they approached the compound. Emily tracked their progress through the magnified field of view, her scope panning slow and deliberate. A role player popped from behind a structure at 600 meters. She read the wind, dialed 2 clicks right, half exhaled, and took the shot. The suppressed report was a whisper, followed by the faint ping of steel. Another target appeared at 800 meters, slightly higher elevation. She adjusted again, cycling the bolt clean, her cheek never lifting from the stock. The hit came half a second later, for 2 hours. The pattern repeated. The SEALs cleared buildings room by room while Emily covered from above, eyes never leaving the glass. 11 targets fell in total, each round hitting within inches of center. Her voice stayed calm over the net, reporting sectors clear, confirming engagements, giving quiet updates on wind changes and shifting light. Every movement was second nature, built from years of repetition. The soundscape was simple, the faint crack of a suppressed rifle, the murmur of radio traffic, and her measured breathing through the headset. When the mission ended, the compound lights came on, illuminating a field of shell casings and cleared buildings. Hayes's voice came through her headset again, even and steady. He told her the exercise was a complete success. No safety violations, no missed shots. He thanked her for stepping in without hesitation and said she had saved the unit from a full training reset. There was a pause before he added that she would always have a place on his team if she ever wanted to cross-train again. Emily smiled slightly as she began packing up her rifle. She replied that she was just doing her job. The fog hung heavy over the ridge as she stood, the cold air sharp against her face. It wasn't triumph that she felt, only quiet validation. In the world she lived in, respect was earned one perfect shot at a time. And tonight, she had earned it again. The morning after the SEAL operation, Fort Moore was still damp from the night rain. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter drove through the gates just after 7:15 a.m., tired but steady. The fatigue sat deep in her shoulders, the kind that comes from focus more than effort. When she reached her office near range control, she found a message waiting in her inbox. The 4 Ranger candidates had requested to reschedule their marksmanship qualification, and they had specifically asked for her to run it. She sat down slowly, reading the details twice, before noticing the attachments beneath the message header. The first 2 were formal apologies, typed in regulation format and routed through the proper chain of command. Sergeant Kyle Duran's was stiff and clipped, more acknowledgement than emotion, but it was written with respect. Specialist Brett Kelton's was longer, admitting his comments were out of line and that he had misjudged her. Corporal Nate Vickers sent only a few lines, saying he had been wrong and that he hoped to learn from her example. Private Jake Owens's note was different. It was short, handwritten, and quiet, thanking her for showing them what right looked like. Emily read each one without reaction. She closed the laptop, grabbed her field cap, and started preparing the range schedule. The day of the qualification arrived under a clear blue sky. The air was dry, the kind of morning shooters liked: cool, stable, and predictable. The range was silent, except for the sound of bolts cycling and brass hitting the dirt. Emily stood at the firing line with her notepad, watching each candidate in turn. Her voice was calm and direct, offering small corrections on trigger control, position, and breathing. They listened now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by focus. When Duran hit center mass at 800 meters, she gave a single nod. When Kelton adjusted for wind perfectly on his final shot, she noted it in silence. All 4 passed their qualification with solid scores. When it was over, they gathered their gear and walked up to her one by one. Each thanked her quietly, without excuses or small talk. She told them the same thing. She told every soldier who passed through her range, stay sharp and keep training. The tone wasn't warm, but it was sincere. Respect wasn't about friendship. It was about showing up ready and doing the work. They understood that now, by late afternoon, the range was empty again. Emily stayed behind, kneeling beside the same table where she had assembled her rifle days earlier. She broke down the M2010 carefully, wiping away the thin layer of dust that had gathered during the day. Every movement was slow and deliberate. When she was done, she checked the chamber, locked the bolt, and looked out across the long stretch of field. The sun hung low, painting the targets in faint gold. The quiet felt good. It wasn't pride or relief, just peace. She thought about the week, the rain, the doubts, the silence that came after every shot. Respect, she knew, was never handed out. It was built one task at a time, one decision at a time, one trigger, pull at a time. Some people forgot that. The best never did. The wind was still, the light fading, and the sound of the last echo from the range lingered long after she closed the case and walked away.